And we're picking up on Chapter 6 of Transformation of America, the true life story of a CIA mind-controlled slave by Cathy O'Brien and Mark Phillips, with Mark Phillips. United States military and NASA control training. Soon after moving to Tennessee, I learned that Senator Byrd had simply exchanged one living hell for another for me. My new mind control handler, CIA operative, and country music ventriloquist stage hypnotist Alex Houston seemed only to pick up where Cox had left off. As destined, Kelly and I moved into a rundown old trailer on Houston's property, which adjoined Jack Green's farm in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. I was subjected to further occult ritual on Green's farm and was ritually impregnated and aborted again, this time by Houston. A difference between Cox and Houston was the superstition factor. Houston knew exactly what he was doing and why he was doing it, in accordance with tried and proven scientific U.S. government mind control research and development. I gleaned this knowledge from conversations I overheard between him and those in the know. Alex Houston was 26 years older than I, and claimed to have gained his knowledge of stage hypnosis and government mind control methods from the military while entertaining overseas in Bob Hope's USO tours. After the tour, Houston reportedly moved to Washington, D.C., where he and his alter ego, dummy Elmer, were regulars on the Jimmy Dean television show in the 1960s. According to Houston, he was regularly booked to entertain officers' clubs on military bases due to his involvement in covert government operations. During the brief interim period that Cox resided on Houston's farm with us, he played music behind government mind control slave Louise Mandrell and her husband/handler, R.C. Bannon. Cox had previously worked with Louise's sister, Barbara Mandrell. At the onset of her government-sponsored career in the 1960s, traveling overseas with her in the same USO tours that launched Houston's career, Irby Mandrell, the Mandrell's father and manager, reportedly sexually abused all three of his daughters and eagerly thrust them into their mind-controlled existence, much the same way my father had sold me. His daughters, too, were owned by U.S. Senator Robert C. Byrd. Cox was soon fired from his position with Louise due to her insanity. Once, when Houston was traveling with the Mandrells, as he so often did throughout the years, Irby Mandrell relayed the events that prompted his firing of Cox. He told Houston and I that Cox had become an embarrassment to him while traveling. I knew he was weird, Irby Mandrell said. That's okay. I can live with that. But when he pitched a tent behind the hotel so he could hear the trumpet sound, signaling him to march to Missouri, I said, "Start marching, son. You're done. You're through in Nashville. Don't ever come back." That's it. He was done. Houston reminisced with Mandrell about the USO days and inquired as to how he had tolerated Cox back when he played music behind Barbara. "Oh yeah, I remember Cox had somewhat of a brain back then," Irby Mandrell continued. "Barbara was just a kid back then with the talent of a full-blown star. I thought she had what it takes to make it in the industry. Then the Byrd, BYRD, came along and introduced us to the latest in technology." Houston interrupted. "Are you talking about music equipment or the kind they've got in Huntsville, Alabama's NASA Mind Control Training Center. Both Mandrell replied, but it was Huntsville that launched her to the stars. The doors opened wide after that. Bird took a lot of pride in Barbara, and the doors just kept opening. With my baby's talent and Bird's influence on her mind and career, there was no way we could lose. When Houston became my appointed mind control handler in 1980, Bird's influence on my mind boosted Houston's entertainment career. His travels had expanded to accommodate covert drug and money laundering operations across the U.S., in Mexico, in Canada, and throughout the Caribbean. Houston had and has a great deal of no-show money, but I was never permitted access to it. Poverty was one more means of control I endured, as slaves like myself were not afforded the freedoms that having money allows. When I was working 3 menial jobs during college, all of my money was taken from me by my parents. All money earned by Cox's cocaine and body parts enterprises was reinvested in the coven and drugs, leaving us dependent on charities for our basic necessities. With Houston, I had to earn every penny I spent on groceries and necessities over and over again, which made earning my keep a deliberately impossible cycle. This kept me financially dependent and further hindered my ability to escape, even if I had known enough to attempt it. My innate protective maternal instincts as a mother may have been accentuated due to my past unsuccessful attempts to protect my brothers and sisters. I now had 2 sisters, in quotes, in parentheses, I mean. It was my desperate need to keep Kelly safe that drove me to the point of fight or flight when I was transferred to Houston. I had long ago lost my ability to fight, but my new maternal instincts compelled me to fight. I did all I could to save Kelly and myself from Houston and her fate in Project Monarch. Since I had no ability to reason and was amnesic, I fled to my parents' new house in affluent Grand Haven, Michigan. I had no concept of what I was running from or to. I arrived with my baby daughter in my arms, the tattered clothes on our backs, and what few donated belongings I had acquired for Kelly. Within a few days, my parents received and followed Senator Byrd's instructions and turned me back over to Houston, who, in turn, sent me back to Louisiana for further conditioning. After 3 months of intense, nonstop tortures by Cox, I could not think to follow maternal instincts and barely knew my own name. I had no idea how old I was, where I was, how long I had been there, and what happened to Kelly during that time. Kelly's own testimony and current programmed polyfragmented multiple personality / dissociative identity disorder reflects the high-tech sophisticated conditioning and torturous trauma she endured during this and numerous ensuing times that we were separated. When I was returned to Houston as orchestrated by Byrd, my brain contained a series of new compartments ready to be programmed and led. Intensive mind control behavior programming began at once, and Houston ensured that I was taken to my appointed destination under the guise of his travels in the country music industry. In the early 1980s, my base programming was instilled at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, by U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino. Oh, God. Aquino holds a top secret clearance in the Defense Intelligence Agency's Psychological Warfare Division, PSYOPs. He is a professed neo-Nazi, the founder of the Himmler-inspired Satanic Temple of Set, and has been charged with child ritual and sexual abuse at the Presidio Daycare in San Francisco, California. But like my father and Cox, Aquino remains above the law, while he continues to traumatize and program CIA-destined young minds in a quest to reportedly create the superior race of Project Monarch mind control slaves. I quickly learned that Aquino did not adhere to his profoundly professed occult superstition any more than I did. His satanic power, in quotes, was in the form of numerous variations of high voltage stun guns, which he used on me regularly. Although Aquino used occultism, blood trauma, as a trauma base, his programming was high tech and clean, not muddled in proverbial witch's brew of ignorance. He quickly dispelled the Cox influence and began programming me according to Bird's specifications as his own little witch for sadistic sex, covert CIA drug smuggling, blackmail, and prostitution operations. During the 3 months I was back with Cox, a muscle in my upper vaginal wall was cut and dropped in preparation for Houston to flesh carve a hideous witch's face for Senator Byrd's perversion. Aquino provided the ancient instructions on how to mutilate me, and Houston used a silver nitrate and hot X-Acto knives to carve the details of the face without any form of anesthesia. By flexing the muscle downward, the face protruded out of my vagina. Not only did this surgery give Bird a vagina suited to his minute, underdeveloped penis, it also provided an equitable curiosity to be displayed over and over again in both commercial and non-commercial pornography and prostitution. On the 1981 anniversary of John F. Kennedy's assassination, I was forced to marry Alex Houston for appearance sake. Earlier that month, when I had been taken to Washington, D.C. for prostitution purposes, Bird informed me that I would actually be marrying him when I pledged my vows to Houston. "It is a covenant between the two of us," Bird had said. "It is me that you will honor and obey till death do us part." Bird then instructed me to pick up my wedding dress from a nearby DC store. Throughout the years, Houston often joked about the significance of my Washington, D.C. wedding dress, which was depicted in pornographic photos and the commercial video to commemorate our wedding night. Alex Houston's best man, Jimmy Walker, was also a photographer for Larry Flint's sexually graphic commercial pornography magazine, Hustler. When I met Bird after the ceremony at Nashville Opryland Hotel as ordered, he presented me with a wedding gift, a rose-patterned crystal crucifix, deliberately designed to anchor our wedding in my Catholic/Vatican-instilled beliefs. The Larry Flint photos depicting me in my wedding dress with the crystal crucifix to commemorate our wedding night was standard lock-in procedure for all mind control slaves I knew who were forced to marry their handlers/owners. Houston's booking agent, Reggie McLaughlin, of United Talent and later the McFadden Agency in Nashville, Tennessee, had been booking CIA government operations. For example, Houston's ventriloquist act, Alex and Elmer, would be scheduled to perform at a country or state fair near Washington, D.C., where I would be picked up by car or helicopter and escorted to the White House or the Pentagon. The ensuing activities would be compartmentalized in my memory in a manner that caused me to believe I had simply been traveling in the country music industry, and no one back home would be suspected of my absence. Another example would be that Houston entertained, quote unquote, at Bird's West Virginia State Fair every year, which gave a legitimate appearance to my presence there, when in fact I was being prostituted to the senator I had, quote, married. During the early 80s, Reggie McLaughlin primarily booked Houston into areas that were conducive to my mind control programming with Aquino. I was first subjected to Aquino's tortures and programming in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, Fort McClellan in Anniston, Alabama, and most frequently at Redstone Arsenal and Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Military mind control was fast, effective, and highly technological, but it was the NASA programming that launched me as a presidential model, quote unquote. Even though Aquino instilled my programming on both military and NASA installations, he had access to the latest technological advancements and techniques through NASA. These included mind foolers such as sensory deprivation tanks, virtual reality, flight simulators, and harmonics. By the age of 2, Kelly had already been subjected to Aquino and his programming through these latest technological advancements, which shattered her fragile young mind before her base personality had a chance to form. Rather than use occultism on Kelly, Aquino traumatized her through sexual assault and high voltage tortures of mind and body. She, like I, to this day carries numerous scars from this, quote, non satanic abuse base. I knew from years of research, NASA technology and Aquino's programming combined with the Project Monarch standard, sleep, food, and water deprivation and high voltage, made Kelly a subject of state of the art genetically multi generational MPD DID psychological mind control engineering. In 1981, Bird personally joined Aquino in Huntsville, Alabama, during one of our programming sessions. NASA cooperated fully with Bird on any and everything, since it was Bird's Senate Appropriations Committee that determined how much and or whether NASA received government funding. Yes, he held the purse strings of our country. I lay naked on the cold metal table, tranced and photographically recording everything, every word and detail of my programming, and every word that Bird and Aquino not so privately discussed. Bird was providing Aquino with specific details on certain perversions he wanted me equipped to fulfill or perform. Additionally, they talked about scrambling my immediate memory with 2 private porn films they were arranged to have produced locally. These were titled How to Divide a Personality and How to Create a Sex Slave. These films are the kind NASA became involved in producing for the dual purpose of scrambling memory and documenting their mind control procedures. And if anybody doesn't believe this, just look up NASA child pornography and you will find articles documenting this. Maybe not this exact thing, but why does NASA have terabytes and terabytes of child pornography? The resident Huntsville, Alabama pornographers were 2 local cops, one of which was and is a sergeant. This served NASA and the CIA well when a cover-up was necessary. How to Create a Sex Slave film depicts a common spin, quote, common spin programming, which in essence is the combination of unlocking or accessing a specific programmed act. For example, the compartment of the mind that holds memory of incest is stimulated to open when the original abuse is imminent. Seeing my father's penis would trigger a specific response, supposedly opening the neuron pathways of my brain to allow the part of my brain that dealt with his actions before to deal with them again. With, quote, spin programming, the trigger of seeing my father's penis is replaced with a combination of specific verbal commands and a specific number of physical spins so that anyone with the combination could access that particular part of my brain. The part of my mind containing, quote, knowledge of the original abuse by my father learned to, quote, like painful, sadistic sex. Senator Byrd wanted me programmed in such a way that he could decide if he wanted me to scream and cry when he whipped me, or if he wanted me to become sexually aroused and beg for more. After programming, when I met Bird, I would, quote, dance like a music box dancer, twirling round and around until Bird's fiddle music stopped. My mind precisely calculated how many revolutions I had made, whether I was capable of conscious counting or not, much like a normal person wakes up at a particular time without an alarm clock, and the desired results were produced as accessed. This is but one simplified example of sex programming, and I was programmed for more than sex. But this particular incident of programming at the U.S. Army Redstone Arsenal would change my existence entirely and set the stage for my role in covert government black budget type operations as a, quote, presidential model. Seeing and or knowing that Kelly was being tortured and programmed proved to be a deterrent, a proved to be a detriment to my own mind control programming, such that the common, quote, cross programming of mother and daughter was rarely viable. In the fall of 1982 was Houston was scheduled to perform at the state fair in Senator Byrd's home state of West Virginia. Byrd arrived at our hotel with Lieutenant Colonel Aquino, who took Kelly with him supposedly for programming purposes. I was left alone in my hotel room with Byrd, whose KKK affiliation fueled his rage over my having been recently prostituted to a black entertainer and CIA operative, Charlie Pride. Although I had no control over the situation to begin with, Byrd expended his fury on me rather than on Houston, who was ultimately responsible for the incident. He took out his whip and began beating me as he had so many times before, only this time it seemed to last forever. Byrd was still whipping me when Aquino returned with my tranced and traumatized daughter. I regained consciousness enough to pull myself off the floor when I heard Kelly's hysterical cries. Byrd ordered me to the bathroom for a cold shower to stop the bleeding. My body could not carry out his orders, and I collapsed again in the bathroom, smearing blood all over the floor. Kelly's cries again revived me, and I crawled to the door to find Byrd sexually assaulting her and Aquino disrobing to join them. One small window in the bathroom appeared to be a possible means of escape to obtain help, but Byrd caught me and knocked me to the floor. The whole bathroom was smeared in blood by the time he threw me into the shower and turned the cold water on to slow the bleeding. Later that afternoon, Kelly and I stood hand in hand in the afternoon sun at the state fair when Senator Byrd was about to make a speech to his constituents. My blouse stuck to my freshly whipped skin as Byrd walked onto the stage, and the crowd cheered. Although Byrd periodically sexually abused Kelly throughout her Project Monarch victimization, the horrific incident in West Virginia was the last time I was able to instinctively think to respond at all. Aquino's mind control programming further ensured it, as did Byrd's access to high-tech mind control equipment via West Virginia Jesuit College, where he claimed the role of head friar. Kelly has reported enduring much sexual abuse by both Byrd and Aquino. Aquino apparently incorporated sexual abuse with his mind control programming and sex training of her, and shared more such events with Byrd. It was also my experience that Byrd's sexual perversions were heightened when Aquino shared in the assault. Traumatic events such as this one in West Virginia reinforced my own programming through conditioning and further locked me into Byrd's seemingly inescapable control.
Callie.
Dogs out and about. The majority of my programming, as well as a large part of Kelly's, was again Oz-themed based. This means the combination of codes, keys, and triggers to access me were related to L. Frank Baum's story, The Wizard of Oz. Whether or not it was Baum's intention, or for the matter Walt Disney's, Lewis Carroll's, etc., it is evident that his psychologically intense story was used for manipulating minds. Much of The Wizard of Oz lends itself to themes commonly used by perpetrators. For example, nearly all MPD/DIDs have commonly used have suffered the loss of pets during ritualized torture. I gotta read that. For example, nearly all multiple personality syndrome or dissociative identity disorders have suffered the loss of pets during ritualized torture, and of Baum's primary character Dorothy's nightmarish experiences over the rainbow in Oz stemmed from her desire to risk her own life to protect her threatened pet. Abusers use this lesson to condition the victim to drop all resistance and cooperate, or I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dogs or child too. The over the rainbow scramble of dreams versus reality provides abusers a theme by which to manipulate the MPD's subconscious perception of switching personalities. Oftentimes, this theme is transdimensional, as is Oz, or that which was just experience was just a bad dream, like Dorothy was told upon her awakening in her own bed back in Kansas.
Callie, come!
CIA cryptic language is manipulation for English language. CIA cryptic language is manipulation of the English language such that words have a double meaning, aka double binds in mental health terminology. It works much the way as communication through inside jokes among people familiar with each other. Perhaps this is a reason for the government's use of professional comedians as slave handlers. Since mind-controlled slaves' minds function conspicuously through their subconscious, which have no way of discerning fantasy from reality or intended meanings from literal meanings, cryptic dual-level language is especially effective. Many CIA covert operations I was involved in occurred in public. Anyone who overheard the conversation would have discerned something very different from what was actually transpired. TRANCE-SPIRED. They use a lot of play on words in here. Transpired, transpired. For example, one of my Washington, D.C. Secret Service escorts linked arms with me like Dorothy did with her companions when walking the yellow brick road. This would have appeared to be normal behavior, or even romantic to outsiders, but to me it was a signal to stay in the course. Bush's quote, and follow with directions. Arm in arm, we walked through the crowded Air and Space Museum of the Smithsonian to nearby NASA headquarters. There he read the service entrance sign on the door, accentuating the syllables ever so slightly. So I heard them cryptically command, "Serve us and Trance." SERVEUSENTRANCE. Service entrance, and they read, "Serve and Trance." Oh, hi, Callie. Nice of you to join us. She's back. Chapter 7. Charm School. After Aquino instilled my base sex programming, I was often taken by Houston to Youngstown, Ohio, to attend sex slave training camp hellhole area at county fairs, fraternal order of police shows, or any little country music entertainment gigs that would bring us into the proximity of the dreaded Charm School. On occasion, Kelly would go through the torture process with me, but usually Houston delivered me to the door for training with other CIA and Mafia slaves my age, and then left taking Kelly with him. When Charm School was in session, there were several girls being tortured and trained at once. I have seen and known numerous girls to go through charm school, but understandably few are reported to have survived or recovered their minds enough to talk about it. Charm School was reportedly operated by an identified member of the Mellon banking family, Bird's endowment for the arts' largest contributor. The operator took the name and role of governor from the movie My Fair Lady in an attempt to confuse my torturous reality with movie fantasy. In the movie, governor is the Cockney title given the professor who transformed a female street urchin into a functioning high society lady. Additionally, Mellon's use of the title governor was intended to create scramble for the real governor who was frequented at the school as though it were only a whorehouse. I am referring to then Governor of Pennsylvania and later U.S. Attorney General, now Secretary for the United Nations, Dick Thornburgh. Aquino provided some of the programming at Charm School, and everyone I knew in government operations was at least aware of it. Then Youngstown Sheriff, now U.S. Representative Jim Trafficant, was unusually present. He capitalized on his ability to portray himself as Lurch by slowly opening the door and saying, "Walk this way," to a literal slave in training. This means walk like he is walking, like Lurch, Igor, a street whore, Scarecrow, and so on. Once the door closed behind me, charm school meant I would be charmed, mesmerized, hypnotized, and programmed to be a high-class prostitute for select politicians. I did learn their way to walk. I learned when to talk, how to dress, how to sit, stand, and all the rest. Table manners were not taught as they were not needed since slaves endured food and water deprivation when working. Above all, we were taught how to gratify any sexual perversion. Just as Trafficant opened the door to charm school for slaves, he oftentimes was the one to, quote, test their newly learned sexual skills to determine when or if the slaves could leave. A typical 3-day course at charm school included the usual factor of sleep, food, and water deprivation, trauma, high voltage, and programming, oftentimes experimental or tried and proven CIA manufactured, quote, designer drugs, were administered, which produced specific brainwave activity to maximize and or compartmentalize programs. I usually spent the first day hanging in the dungeon. Charm School is housed in an identified stone historical railroad baron's former residence, and the basement was in fact a wine cellar dungeon. It was dark, damp, and musty, and was decorated in classic torture chamber fashions, just like John Podesta's basement where he watches movies. It was complete with various hanging chains and a stretching rack, whips, and altars, including one specifically designed for bestiality sex. As I hung by my wrists, I could hear and smell the animals in the next cells. A black Nubian goat called Satan, a small donkey named Nestor, others, sometimes a small white pony referred to as Trigger, and various dogs, cats, snakes, and others. All charm school animals were trained to sexually respond to the smell of urine. When someone such as Dick Thornburgh, who particularly enjoyed this kind of kink, entered my cell and urinated on me, I knew I would soon be released from my chains and led to the animal altar for bestiality lessons, pornography, and to please a perverse onlooker. I was hung by my ankles, stretched on a rack, burned and tortured repeatedly. My feet and hands were chained to the wall for what was termed off-the-wall sex. I was taught silence in Oz fashion since screaming did not produce results anyway unless they wanted it for pornography. This was implemented with an electronic canny bark collar normally used to train dogs not to bark. I was repeatedly filmed pornographically and always taken upstairs to the master chambers, quote, for prostitution to participants, including the real governor, quote, of Charm School, then Pennsylvania Governor Dick Thornburg, Congressman Jim Trafficant, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, and others. When Kelly was with me, she endured the same, and we were forced to see each other physically tortured and further psychological trauma. This was to ensure I could never remember the who, what, when, or where of our bizarre enslavement. This is what is sometimes referred to as cross programming. In spite of the deliberately created amnesic blocks, I developed a subconscious sympathetic understanding for other charm school slaves that extended outside the walls of this man made hell. This understanding emanated from the depths of my being, creating a compassion for other mind control victims that compels me to give voice to their silent pleas for help to this day. I became close friends with one such victim who must remain anonymous in order to survive to eventually recover. This beautiful blonde and I had numerous opportunities to be together throughout the years, as Houston's government-sponsored travels routinely took him into her home state of Pennsylvania while Dick Thornburg was governor. My friend and I were photographed together for Larry Flint's commercial pornography publications and featured in the illicit films that contributed to funding CIA covert operations. In addition to this, she and I were able to spend 2 weeks together when her husband/handler traveled to Houston's farm in Tennessee for instructions on handling his new, quote, bride. I was, quote, maid of honor for my friend's, quote, wedding, which was no more a marriage than mine to Houston, as was customary with Project Mind Control slaves. Her marriage to her handler equated to marriage to her mind control owner. U.S. Senator Arlen Specter, the wedding I was forced to participate in was for pornography purposes only, and it took place in Arlen Specter's Connaught Lake House in Pennsylvania. Specter's stone house was located in a wooded remote setting and was masculine in decor. Side rooms were either designated for perverse sex or were furnished with antiquated NASA virtual reality and programming equipment. The musty smell of Specter's playhouse was overpowered by the scent of roses, which he symbolically presented to his slave on their, quote, wedding day. My friend's wedding photos included Catholic themes, and the crucifix featured was a rose cut similar to the one I had received from Bird. Regardless of how this girl was depicted, her innate morality was apparent to me. She and I were referred to as mirror/mirror cats, MIRROR/MERE cats, mirror cats, due to the similarity of our victimizations. Like me, she was controlled through manipulation of her religious beliefs and maternal instincts. The delicate rose tattooed on her left wrist, signifying her role in government operations, did not detract from her high-class projection any more than Specter's immorality could mar her innate goodness. Once Arlen Specter officially became the slave's owner, her charm school status rose to, quote, presidential model. In addition to charm school, I endured extensive programming to prepare me for future operations. Houston was often booked into Oklahoma fairs, Masonic lodges, FOP, conventions, and so on, in order that I be back in the vicinity of Tinker Air Force Base for further programming. My Tinkerbell conditioning further enhanced my photographic memory through direct control for receiving and delivering government messages, which amounted to a computerized compartmentalization of my brain, so to speak. I was also trained in covert criminal operations such as international drug mule transactions for funding the Pentagon's and CIA Black Ops budgets. That's why making drugs legal is great. Not that doing drugs is great, but it hinders these people a funding source. But then they just go straight to human trafficking. I mean, there's really no stopping these people. We got to do something. Houston's CIA orchestrated travels in the country music industry led me to a top secret military slash NASA installation at the Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. Then, quote, you can run but you can't hide, unquote, conditioned was deeply ingrained in my mind there through a technique that was later used on Kelly as as well as on other mind control slaves. I was taken underground to so-called secret circular room where the walls were covered with numerous screens showing satellite pictures from around the world. These satellites are referred to as the eye in the sky, quote. An Air Force official explained to me that every move quote, could be monitored via satellite, end quote. On a separate four-screen viewer, he demonstrated what in retrospect was a contrived pre-recorded slideshow with the scenes changing as rapidly as he spoke and typed it into the computer. Quote, where will you run? Unquote, he asked me. Quote, to the Arctic? Question mark. To the Antarctic? Brazil? The mountains? The desert? The prairies? The hills of Afghanistan? The city of Kabul? Devil's Tower, Wyoming? Would you try to run to Cuba and live among our enemies? We can find you there. There is truly no place to run and no place to hide. The US Senate, the picture of Bird, the White House, or to your own backyard, my father was depicted waving from his front door, cupping his hands over his mouth, saying, come back, quote. Just like Aunt Elm of Wizard of Oz. The moon, we got you covered. You can't run, you can run, but you can't hide, unquote. This had been sufficient to convince me in my suggestible state that every move could be monitored. During the course of my training slash conditioning, I was routinely prostituted to Senator Byrd in Washington, D.C. at the West Virginia State Fair, NASA in Huntsville, Alabama, and the Opryland Hotel in Nashville, Lieutenant Colonel Aquino, Tennessee. One such night when I was to be prostituted to Byrd at Opryland Hotel was scheduled to join him in perversely assaulting me. Much to my horror, Aquino arrived early in full army dress uniform backstage at the Grand Ole Opry when I saw Aquino talking with the Vatican-based Project Monarch slave runner Chris Christopherson, whom I had known since 1979. My personality programmed for Opry events, quote, short-circuited. Under circumstances such as this, a multiple without programming would have switched personalities autogenically, whereas I could only switch upon command. I backed away, dazed, right into a soft drink machine. Christopherson saw me as I backed further between the wall and the machine. What are you doing here, little lady? Christopherson asked. The colonel wants to see you. Aquino walked over and sarcastically asked, what are you doing in those machine wires? That could very well be a shocking experience for you. All experiences with Aquino or Christopherson resulted in high-voltage electric shock torture, and apparently neither had any regard for human life. Aquino used the opportunity to reinforce his belief that I had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from his power, his stun gun. While I untangled myself from the wires, Christopherson and Aquino continued their banter at my expense. Christopherson held up his key ring and jingled it, catching my undivided attention as conditioned, while he told Aquino You're gonna need the keys to the kingdom to work with this one right here. Keys to the kingdom, quote unquote, of course refers to my previously instilled interdimensional Catholic programmed personalities. Since Aquino was my primary mind control programmer at the time, Christofferson was informing Aquino of programs previously instilled in my childhood via the RITE, to remain silent. By jingling the keys, he was demonstrating his control over me and his momentary edge on Aquino. I got him, Christofferson was saying as he jingled the keys. She's mine unless you want to play ball. Besides, you have to. The bird sent me. I've been expecting you, Aquino said with a smile. Events later that night proved that Aquino had been supplied the keys to my previously established Jesuit-based programming, which he and Bird used and altered to suit their own perversions. Bird monitored all my programming, quote, progress, and then often tortured me with the whip and with his whip and pocket knife. He picked up where my mother left off to destroy any self-esteem I might have inadvertently developed. He said, there is no place for you to turn because if you could think to talk, no one would ever believe I would have anything to do with the likes of you. He often threatened me that I was considered, quote, disposable because, after all, the first presidential model, Marilyn Monroe, was killed right in front of the public eye and no one knew what happened. Bird's threats and cruelty were unnecessary, as I could no longer think to seek help anyways. But he loved to hear himself talk and would often drone on and on in his infamous long-winded recitations, while I was photographically recording every word he said. He detailed the inner operational structure of the world domination effort, including psychological warfare strategies, and explained how he had and would utilize his, quote, expert knowledge of the Constitution to manipulate it and the so-called U.S. justice system and more. His loose lips provided me yet another means of surviving and staying a step ahead of, quote, the game, once Kelly and I were rescued from our mind-controlled existence. Senator Byrd revealed his, quote, justifications for criminal activity to me as well. He used me as a sounding board even though he knew I was incapable of input or response. He rehearsed in keeping with his motto, the only way we can fail is to fail to think of an excuse. Byrd, quote, justified mind control atrocities as a mean of thrusting mankind into accelerated evolution according to the neo-Nazi principles to which he adhered. He, quote, he justified manipulating mankind's religion to bring about the prophesied biblical, quote, world peace through the only, quote, means available. Quote unquote. Total mind control in the New World Order, after all, he proclaimed. Even the Pope and Mormon prophet know this is the only way to peace, and they cooperate fully with the project. Byrd also justified my victimization by saying, you lost your mind anyway, and at least you have destiny and purpose now that it's mine. Our country's involvement in drug distribution, pornography, and white slavery was justified, quote unquote, as a means of, quote, gaining control of illegal activities worldwide, unquote, to fund black budget covert activity that would, quote, bring about world peace through world dominance and total control, end quote. He adhered to the belief that 95% of the world's people want to be led by the 5%, and claimed this can be proven because the 95% don't want to know what really goes on in the government. Bird believed that in order for this world to survive, mankind must take a, quote, giant step in evolution through creating a superior race, end quote. To create this, quote, superior race, Bird believed in the Nazi and KKK principles of, quote, annihilation of underprivileged races and cultures, end quote, through genocide to alter genetics and breed the, quote, more gifted, the blondes of this world, end quote. As Bird's captive audience, literally, I absorbed information that the other so called masterminds behind the New World Order would never have revealed for security reasons. But Bird regarded me as, quote, his object, a game piece that he could strategically move through life as though he were playing a chess game. He perceived me as totally under his control with no possibility of my ever being rescued, surviving, and recovering my mind and memory. Bird likely would have talked to a post, and I filled the role as his silent sounding board. My CIA operative mind control handler Alex Houston was often scheduled to perform at the Swiss Villa Amphitheater in Lampe, Missouri, which is yet another installation where I was programmed. Swiss Villa was a cover for a CIA near death trauma center, of which there are several across the country. It is a remote high security resort enclosed with military barbed wire fences that swings its guarded gate open to the local public for country music concerts. The small amphitheater covers the covert activities occurring inside, which includes U.S. government CIA cocaine and heroin distribution operations and mind control projects. Swiss Villa, like Mount Shasta, California compound, was also used as a training and operations camp for the shadow government's paramilitary projects referred to by Senator Inouye, Inouye, Democrat of Hawaii. I learned that this not so secret military buildup, sanctioned by corrupt members of our government, consisted of special forces, trained robotic soldiers, numerous black unmarked helicopters, and the highest technological advancements in top secret weaponry and, quote, Star Wars electromagnetic mind control equipment. These paramilitary compounds were intended for global policing of the New World Order through multi-jurisdictional police force. Through the multi-jurisdictional police force. Quote, a most dangerous game, end quote, was often played at Swiss Villa and involved CIA agents, politicians, and others who would attend the resort just for the sport of hunting humans. Kelly and I were both hunted at Swiss Villa. The tortures and rape after being caught were extensive and sufficiently traumatizing our minds for ensuing programming, as well as for creating memory compartmentalization for the high levels operations we witnessed behind the villa's patrolled fences. It was at Swiss Villa that I was taught, quote, the most dangerous game, end quote, was one where a slave tried to escape and reveal what he or she had learned. If the hunters could not catch and stop the slave, then the black helicopters patrolling the area would. And if all else failed, the eye in the sky would locate him or her, and a torturous death was supposedly imminent. According to my abusers, my deprogrammer and primary advocate Mark Phillips and I have embarked on the most dangerous game, quote unquote, through efforts such as releasing this book and turning a spotlight on the shadow government to reveal its members, identities, and their crimes against humanity. Mark Phillips and I are determined to beat them at their own, quote, game by arming the 95%. With the truth that perpetrators don't want them to know. Now, that's enough horror for today, don't you think? Callie's a good dog.